Aimee, welcome.
Hello.
It's so good to have you on the Empower Her podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, we are all about, being able to share our own experiences to be able to give back to as many people as we can. So I'm very grateful to have you here today sharing your story and bits and pieces about your life so that others can either take what they can from it, essentially. So thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
So shall we just get straight into it?
Absolutely. I'm eager.
Yeah, same. I'm like, let's not. I was going to be like, how's your morning? Like, how's your week been? But let's just get straight into it.
We've got too much to unpack.
We do. I was like, we don't
Got a lot
have
to unpack.
We do not have time for the how are yous.
No.
We can say that.
We've done that.
We can save that for later. So essentially, so our listeners can get to know you on a deeper level. In your bio, I've explained, a little bit about your life, but can we go into a little bit more depth of how you got to where you are today so that people can form a really clear understanding of your life? Because it is one of those stories where when I first heard it at your event at Nourish, I was like full body goosebumps, jaw on the ground. Like I knew bits and pieces of your life story, but I didn't know the finer details. And I think for me, I just had one of those moments where I was like, whoa, my perspective on life has completely shifted from your story. So that's essentially what I want to be able to, for you to share with our listeners today. So just a little bit about your story in a little bit more depth and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I think it's pretty important that I explain exactly what it is that I have, and it is Hirschsprung's disease. And it's very, very uncommon. So I've even come across some doctors in my time who have only heard about it here and there. So it's extremely rare. And it is a disease that affects basically the colon or the ganglion cells that live in the colon, small intestine, large intestine. And usually when babies are born, there's a few cells missing and the diagnosis is quite difficult because the symptoms sometimes can also mimic Crohn's. So when I was born, I was incredibly unwell, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And by the time I was about 12 days old, my parents had finally found a surgeon in Brisbane who was able to diagnose me. But what they weren't expecting was it wasn't just my colon or my small intestine that was affected. So essentially to put it in perspective and make it make sense straight away is there was only 70 centimetres that wasn't affected from my colon, small intestine and large intestine. So I was very unwell and this had never been documented before. And only recently have I found out, I'm nearly 36 years old, that I still on medical records and the only baby to have lived, at all, with anything less than 100 centimetres of affected bowel. So even at nearly 36 years old, I'm still finding out things about myself, which is absolutely wild. But that's where it all started. I was incredibly sick. My parents were incredibly young too. So my mum was 19 when I was born. So
Baby.
Not only was she navigating, an unexpected pregnancy, I was also very, very, very unwell. So by the time I was a teenager, I'd had hundreds of surgeries. I was very, very sick. And just when I kind of started to come to terms with who I was and what was wrong with me and the fact that it wasn't going to go anywhere, I then came into my 20s and then the infertility struck. So it was, and from a young age, I knew it would be difficult to have a baby, but I did not know how difficult it would be. And fortunately, I met my beautiful husband quite young at 19.
Wow.
My Jake. And I had to make it, very apparent to him straight away that, this is my life and this is going to be my life forever. And if you want to have children, you need to, imagine having this conversation at 20, 19, 20 years old, saying that my body is going to decline a lot faster than anyone else's. So I need to think about children pretty early on. And fortunately we fell in love so quickly, and we were married by 21 or 22. So our IVF journey started literally a month after we got married.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was, straight from, navigating life with this bowel disease to then straight into your 20s trying for a baby. And we tried for I think it was around 5 to 6 years with my body and, collecting lots of eggs and lots of embryos, and we had lots of loss. So in total we had around 8 miscarriages. And it was just taking a toll on my body so bad, to the point where I was just becoming so disconnected from my physical self that I was just living numb, I guess you could say. And it's really hard to sit here and also specifically speak to certain moments in my life, because I actually don't really remember much. And I think it's because that's just the effect of pain medication and synthetic drugs, which is what I grew up on, because that was all everyone knew to just keep me alive, was keep feeding me all of this medication to keep me well and alive. And I'm so grateful for, the medical system and my parents and everyone doing their best they could to keep me here. But it just kept suppressing and making everything worse and causing other things to go wrong. And then, and it feels like I'm skipping a lot, but, there's a lot to unpack in 35 years.
Yes.
And I don't want to have to go into every single detail, because we'd need a lot longer than one podcast.
We might need the whole day.
We might. So by the time I was 30, we'd had a beautiful daughter via surrogacy. My sister carried for us, and I opted to have a hysterectomy just after I turned 30, because I just couldn't stand the physical pain anymore, because the disease and the scar tissue had grown onto my reproductive organs, which is what was preventing me from carrying a baby past 12 weeks. And that had led to endometriosis. And I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. And it was just, the list kept growing, and I'd had enough. And when the surgeons said to me, look, this scar tissue is just growing and it's causing you so much grief, and it's going to keep growing. You don't necessarily need your uterus or your ovaries or your cervix anymore unless you want to have another baby. And by this point, I was just exhausted. 30 years old, should be entering the best years of your life, and I was exhausted. So I opted to take it all out. And that's where the real journey started. Yeah. So I just, going into your 30s, plus the hysterectomy, immediate menopause, it really started to unfold. But in saying that, it was also like a rebirth. Yeah.
I can only imagine. I think for me, listening to this story again, it still hits home in so many different ways. Like you take different parts of your story that I may not have heard properly when you first spoke about it, and it hits you in a different way, and almost like quite emotional, especially when it comes to around your sister and, not being able to carry your child. I think that would hit home for a lot of women.
Absolutely.
And men, that's also something hard for them. But thank you so much for sharing that in so beautifully said and spoken in such a small period of time, being able to get it all out.
I know it's hard to unpack 35 years into 5 minutes, but
and you did it beautifully.
With the conversation ahead, we've nutted out what's most important and what's going to land
today
the most. Yeah,
definitely. And for me, I'm thinking, like, as you're speaking, I'm like, I've got questions about this and I want to know more about that. But maybe there's going to be a part 2. Who knows at this point? Maybe. But let's get into my first question for you. As you moved through your journey, especially navigating your health challenges, how was your relationship with self? So, yeah, I feel like that says it all, really.
Yeah, I had to grow up very quickly. So I feel like only now, looking back, I had to begin that relationship with myself very early on. And I feel like when most teenagers are coming into that, or even the adolescent age, where we're really starting to figure out who we are, who our people are, who our people aren't. I was so focused on just getting through the next day, even as an adolescent. You know, every day was different for me, and one day I could be completely healthy and fine and have all this energy and within a matter of hours be in hospital. So things changed very quickly for me, like the weather, literally. That's how quickly things would change. So I feel like the relationship with myself began to develop very early on. I would say by the time I was a teenager, I was very aware of who I was. And I had to be, because when you live with a disease like this that is just so unpredictable and invites other illnesses in, you have to become so aware of your body, especially with what you're putting into it, what you're putting onto it, who you're around as well, because energy is a big thing. And I was constantly focusing on I was so determined to be normal, put it that way. I was so determined to be like everyone else. And despite my disease, I worked very hard on not letting it define me. So I did all the sport. I had a job at 14. I couldn't wait to work. I couldn't wait to finish school so I could start businesses. And I feel like this is a big driving factor of why I do what I do today. And it's because it really upsets me to think that people want to start changing their health after it's already on sacrifice. I don't want that for people. I want them to take charge and do what they want to do and nourish their body before they have to actually think about it. It should just be a way of life.
I think that's really powerful in itself. As a young, from my life experiences and how I saw life was like, oh, I'm young, I'll be fine, I'll deal with that at a later age. Like, a lot of drinking when I was younger. Mum would be there being like, eat this and do this and this is great for your body. And I would completely and utterly ignore her because for me, I was like, I'm having the best time of my life.
Yeah. And see, I still did those things. I was still naughty. I snuck out of home. I went to the parties. I had the alcohol. The difference is I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
When you're 16, 16-year-olds are just out being 16-year-olds, having fun.
Naive.
They don't care about the outcome. They don't care about what's going to happen the next day or how they're going to feel the next day or what it's going to do to their body. They don't even think about it. I had to. So if I snuck out, went to a party and had some alcohol, I was unbelievably sick, unwell. And looking back now, my mum probably just thought, oh, she's unwell because she's, because I've got this disease,
Little did she
every
know.
day was different.
Yeah.
But there was times where I had been at a party, drinking alcohol, doing all the things, but I knew I shouldn't have been doing it. That's the difference. But I was so determined to be normal. I just wanted to be like everyone else. And I had some really dark times as well when, I knew that this was it. But at the same time, I just wanted more for myself.
So when you say I wanted what was normal, what was normal in your eyes? So essentially someone that wasn't unwell.
Basically, yeah. I didn't want to have to wake up of a morning and be like, what's going to happen today? Like, am I going to have a leak at school, or am I going to just be really unwell and have to call an ambulance? I didn't want that anymore. It was exhausting. Constantly being, on guard.
I can't even imagine. So you've got your normal teenagers who are potentially, and I'm sure you were thinking about this too, but boys and parties and only having to focus on like, where am I going to get my money for my vodka on the weekend? You had a lot more that you were processing.
Absolutely.
And I think at that age, at 16 or 17 or 18, you are naive and you don't think that these things can happen to you. But for
You're fearless.
Fearless, 100%. Sometimes I think, I wish I could go back to that
100%
stage of my life. But you really quite literally had to have quite, I guess, intimate chats with yourself because you were so aware of what was happening to your body and from all your surgeries and things like that.
Yeah.
So my next question for you is, were there ever moments where you felt really disconnected to yourself?
Yeah, there's 3, I know it sounds really bizarre, but there is 3 significant moments in my life that I actually think about quite often. And it's not in a bad way. I don't sit there and feel sad about it. I actually sit here and think how impactful it is to have these thoughts and how lucky I am to have the driving, to have this to drive me. And the first one is I would have been 8 or 9, and you would have heard this story. This is pretty much how I opened my story at my event, and it was only on that day that I had actually ever said it out loud. So before that time, I never told my mum. I never told my husband. I never told anyone about these thoughts that I used to experience. And I would have been 8 or 9 years old. And my bed used to sit under a windowsill. And I loved it because before I'd go to sleep every night, I could see the stars and all that kind of stuff. And I was convinced that's where God was. And I wasn't in a religious family or a religious school or anything, but I was convinced that that's where God would be, and I could just talk to him whenever I needed. And one night I said, I remember I even got out of the bed and I prayed and I said, I've had enough. Like at 8 or 9 years old, and I'm a mum now, and I think this is why it hits me so hard now. I said, if you're not going to change my body and you're going to make me stay like this, don't let me wake up tomorrow. And at the time, you're just asking for what you need so badly. But it's only now, as a mother, that I understand what I was asking for. I didn't want to be here anymore. I was that exhausted. Not exhausted from the pain. I can take the pain. Give me all the physical pain. But looking back now, especially at photos, and I can see the black under my eyes, I was exhausted. I was sick of fighting. I was sick of waking up every day going, why me? Why couldn't it be someone else? Or not even that, just why, if there is a God, why do people be born like this? I remember thinking like that constantly at that age. And I just think to myself, how unfair. And that would absolutely kill me if I knew my daughter was having thoughts like that. Especially if it's something too that you can't control. My disease has no cure. So it's funny to think too that I actually suppressed that so much that I actually didn't remember thinking that until I was writing the manuscript for my book.
Wow.
So I went on a retreat not too long after I had my hysterectomy, and we had to do a lot of meditation and a lot of writing and a lot of breath. And those experiences took me back to those moments in my life, and that's when I remembered.
Wow.
So I think between the pain medication,
yes,
and just the exhaustion, I had suppressed everything so far down because I was so determined to just live that normal life that I was never taught how to actually sit in my body and feel and express. So it all came out in my 30s.
And here we are, doing the work.
The second time I felt really disconnected the most was that first miscarriage. And without, and people can take this a lot of different ways, but I was never sad about losing the baby because I was used to bad news. The fact I felt pregnant at all was a surprise. What used to hit hard for me is there was a friend's wedding that I missed because I was in the hospital waiting to go and have an embryo. Like I had to wait to go and have it basically removed from my uterus because I'd had a miscarriage and then my body wouldn't let go of the baby. So instead of going to the wedding and having fun with my friends, I was in the hospital bed. So I felt extremely disconnected throughout my IVF journey to the point where it actually removed a lot of emotion to the point where I would miscarry and I wouldn't feel anything. The only reason I kept going back at one point is because I was just so determined to become a mum because I was told that I probably wouldn't. And I know that sounds really awful, and that's not why I ended up having my baby, not just because I wanted to. I was determined. I genuinely wanted to be a mum. And I knew I would be a mum. I just didn't know how. And obviously we got there eventually. And the third time I felt disconnected was when they removed all of my reproductive organs. I never thought, and I never had anyone ever explain to me that I would feel coming out of that operating room like a different person. I didn't know who I was, where I was going, what I was doing. Having all of my reproductive organs removed, like straight from the cervix to the tubes, to the uterus, the ovaries, everything gone. Everything. And that took a lot away from me spiritually. And it was a really, really hard experience and a very painful one. That first 12 months after my hysterectomy was unbearable. I actually remember thinking to myself again, just end it. I don't want to feel like this anymore. And even though it had stopped the endometriosis pain for me, it had invited a whole other world. And I just, now looking back, 5 years on, it was a release. It was absolutely a release. It was an opportunity for everything that I had suppressed. It was coming up and it was coming out.
Wow. It was almost like now I can feel, like now it's time.
I felt everything. I felt everything. The first, I would say 18 months of that recovery after my hysterectomy, the feelings, everything came up.
Isn't that wild? Because you did mention that you suppressed so much, like when you were growing up, just to get through, just to make it through the next day. And it was kind of like your coping mechanism. You're protecting yourself by suppressing.
Yeah.
So when you've had this operation and taken, everything that you need to create babies, to, everything, it was almost like the body was like, okay, now I need to feel. Now I need to present you the pain that you have suppressed for so long. And then that's essentially where the more holistic overlook of healing began for you. Is that right?
Yes, that was, I would say, the key turning point of my life. I think for the first time in my life, I was forced to be still. I actually couldn't do much because, I had drains, everything you could possibly imagine. And it was also the year of COVID. So I spent a lot of time in hospital on my own. Yeah. And it was a very, very confronting, mentally confronting year. Yeah. It was unbelievable. And when I was well enough to return to work, I was doing real estate at the time. I thought, yep, I'm back on deck. I kind of got over the physical side of everything and thought I had recovered and went straight back into the workforce. And at this point, my daughter was 4. So, she was in daycare and just the best years too. So I feel like I also missed a whole year of her life because I was just so unwell. So physically, I tapped out completely, checked out.
Almost in a way, would you say it disconnected to your daughter because of what was presented in your life?
I had disconnected externally from everything, everyone, literally. I lost friends. Relationships with family members broke down. And in the moment, I had no idea it was even happening. I was in so much physical pain. I was on slow release morphine. Yeah. It was, and that was also while I was working, driving around. It was the only way I could get out of bed. The pain was that bad.
Wow. So for me, going off that question of, having moments of disconnect, how did you reconnect to yourself? Or how did you, as an 8-year-old girl, I can't say that you probably would have connected with yourself then or known how to, but maybe later on in life, with having the operation or moments with your daughter, what are some tools that if our listeners are going through moments where they're like, oh, this is flagging something for me and I feel quite disconnected to self, I feel disconnected to my daughter, my partner, family, whatever it may be, whatever is presenting in your life, what are some things that you did to come back to yourself, whether it was when you started the healing process at 30 or if I'm wrong, correct me, or throughout your life, what are some things that you did to reconnect back to self?
Well, I had to get, how would you say it? Almost, I had to get very intimate with myself. I had to force stillness, and I had to let go of constantly trying to fill up everyone's cup before, my cup was empty by this point, completely empty. And I remember vividly, I woke up one day and it would have been, 18 months after this hysterectomy, and I'd had enough. I walked straight into the agency I was working at and I quit. My husband was sitting next to me, had no idea.
Oh,
Jake
so
had no idea.
completely unaware that you were quitting.
I woke up one day and that switch had completely flicked. I didn't take my medication that morning.
How did that day look for you quickly?
Oh, that month was awful.
Painful, yeah.
So painful. The doctor had me on antidepressants because I was clinically depressed. Now I know it was actually menopause. So
I'm like getting can I just quickly say as well, I don't know, this might rough up some people's feathers, but I almost feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but a domino effect of everything in your life, medications, operations. There's this domino effect, but then they're giving you a new medication for that has been caused by A, B, and C.
Oh, 100%.
And I'm getting
100%. No, I was never taught alternatives. I was never taught alternatives. I was only taught to suppress. That's all. I was taught how to stop the pain, not fix it. So I quit my job. There's the income gone. I stopped my pain medication. Cold turkey, antidepressants, cold turkey. I know. Anyone listening to this who has experienced, even stopping coffee or soft drink cold turkey,
it's rough.
Morphine and antidepressants, gone. Wow. I just chucked them out. I'd had enough. And quit the job. And then also the reason I think what really flagged this was I was working with someone who was about to run a retreat. And I was like, I'm going on that. Never done a retreat in my life. Never done breath work, never done meditation, never gone a day without medication, ever. And that's when it all started. And that's what I mean by I had to get very intimate with myself. I had to really feel. Everything. I had to feel everything. The emotional pain. Oh, my God, the tears. I would just cry. And but if you asked me why I was crying, I had no idea why.
Yeah.
Honestly. Couldn't watch any sad things on social media, nothing.
Movies.
And a lot of things started coming up from my childhood too. Because like I said before, I was never able to sit and talk about childhood memories because I could never remember them. But that's when...
But then you started to remember them through...
Yes. Through this release. Through this release, wow. Awakening, rebirth, fresh start, whatever you want to label it, that's what happened. So I feel like the turning point for me and what can be for anyone else who is really navigating and trying to feel less stuck is to stop the noise, the external noise. You need to start tapping in. You need to start listening to your body and sitting in it. And there is so many different modalities out there now. I mean, I quit going to F45 every day, switched it in for Pilates because of the rehabilitation it offers. And obviously I'd had a full hysterectomy. So I had extreme lower back pain because I now longer have a damaged pelvis. So I have no support. So I had to reconnect with my deep core, which did so much more than actually just help my physical body. It helped me become so aware of my physical body and my mind-to-body connection, absolutely insane. And now I teach Pilates. And I don't teach Pilates because it's a trend. I teach it because it significantly changed my life with how I feel physically. I learned how to breathe, and that is now my pain relief. Wow. So I still feel physical pain every day of my life. Every single day. The pain never goes away because my organs can't be put back. They're gone. So I almost feel like my body experiences phantom feelings, phantom pains. You know, I still experience ovulation pain. I have no ovaries. And ovulation pain for me is crippling. So those things never went away. So I had to learn how to breathe. And then I also had to learn how to work on my business mindset again because that was gone. My creative was gone. And I then learnt that through meditation, you know, by sitting and not seeking external validation. I had to sit and get to know myself and sit in my thoughts and, the energy. I had to shift my energy. So I would say breath and meditation was huge for me. I had to look at who I was hanging around with.
Massive.
Who was I speaking to every day? And this goes for family members too, not just friends.
Amen.
This is not just your friends. This is your family members too. Who is in your life that is toxic to you? Get rid of them. It's not worth it.
Well said.
So I would say, to answer your question, take a really long look at your external environment. What are you putting into your body? What are you putting on your body? Who are you hanging around? It all adds up. It's all a collective.
It really does. And I was literally just going to highlight the things that you had mentioned, which was you stopped your pain medication, which is what goes in your body. I'm sure your diet moved and changed as you went through that. You were mindful of who you were hanging around, what you were doing. You connected to self through breath, movement. You found a movement that worked for your body, Pilates. So ask yourself, what movement feels good for me? Is it going to F45 and, you know, thrashing the body and moving really quickly? If it is, amazing. But I think for our listeners as well, get clear on what feels good for you.
Absolutely.
Not what you said as well, the external say is good for you. What feels good for you from your own voice.
Absolutely.
So well said. Well said there. I think as well as we move through this podcast, I've got so many questions that come up for me, but I think we'll shift and navigate as we go for time, because I could quite literally sit here for so long and ask you so many different questions, but a few things that I really want to get out of the podcast essentially is relationships. So we've touched on relationship with self. I'd love to touch a little bit more on relationships with others. So if you feel comfortable, can you share how your relationship with your parents shaped you? Quickly on that is, you did mention that you didn't process much as you were younger. It was not until you were older that things had come up for you.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to tap into that a little bit.
That's right. So my parents separated when I was really young, and I have beautiful parents, absolutely beautiful parents, and they did everything they could have. I mean, at 19 and 20, or, you know, I think my dad was 25 when I was born. So I just couldn't even fathom having a very unwell baby that you just don't even know is going to live or not at that age, while you should be having fun in your 20s. So they did everything they could, but they did separate. And, you know, with respect to them, they did their best in bringing me up. But as I said earlier, I had became so self-aware at such a young age that by the time I was an adult, I knew exactly what I wanted and what I needed in a partner. And there is no way I was going to settle for any less. Because although I struggled with identity, I never ever struggled with who I knew I needed in my life.
Wow. That's so powerful in itself. So almost, correct me if I'm wrong, but things that presented for you in your life, you were very clear on, I don't want to experience that in my romantic relationship. And I know right from wrong, which I think, what this podcast is all about is identifying patterns and behaviors that no longer serve you as an individual to then attract a healthy love. But you almost had a bit of a different perspective. Some women have to learn that the hard way of what they want, but you already knew. And I think there's so much beauty within that to be able to share with our listeners as well.
Well, one thing that comes with being a sick person is you carry around this weight that you're a burden on many people. And that was not that I ever experienced fear, because it is not an emotion that I do experience. But I was always fearful of getting into a relationship where I would be the burden, I would be the problem, I would be the block. So I had to get very clear on who needed to be in my life, who I needed in my life. And I also didn't want to add the pressure. I was also very smart to realize that that's a lot to take on. I'm a lot to take on. So if that person showed up, amazing. But I was also very, very confident on my own. Wow. I feel like because of the women who raised me, my mum is a very independent and strong woman, and so was my mum's mum. My mum's mum lived on her own most of her life and raised 5 children on her own. So I feel like it's in the blood to be a strong, independent woman. So I never lost sleep thinking I'm going to be alone. Put it that way. I'm fine on my own. What I wasn't ready for was for my husband to walk into my life at 19 years old. And I was working in a hair salon at the time, and when he walked in, it turns out it was my boss's son. I went home. I was living with my mum at the time. I said, I've just fallen in love.
Just like that.
That's not even a joke.
Wow. I think I remember you telling me this.
I tell it to people because it is, even now, we've been together since we were 19.
Yeah.
I still look back and go, I knew.
Straight away.
I absolutely knew. And yeah, we hit it off pretty quickly. And I knew within moments of meeting and being in the presence of Jake that he was a strong, empathetic and supportive person.
It's like your body was like flagged it straight away and said,
knew.
This is my...
And totally not my type.
Really?
No.
Wow.
But I never went looking for men.
You just knew.
No, I didn't have time for that. I was too busy trying to survive to worry about men. All I knew is who I didn't want. I needed someone who was going to be with me in my sick days, not at the footy, not at the pub, with me. And I also knew that was a lot to ask for, but I knew within moments of meeting Jake that would never be too much. And it wasn't, and it still isn't.
Wow. I think touching on this before we go on to our next question for the listeners listening right now, whether you are in a relationship or you're single. Wow. I want you to ask yourself, what do I need in a relationship? Without the external, what do I value? Or almost like, what are your values within a relationship? Because I think you had great clarity on what you needed. You needed someone to be there, to be loving, to be empathetic, to, create a beautiful life.
I needed unconditional love.
Unconditional love. So if you're listening to this, what are some things that come up for you? What do you need in your relationship?
What are your boundaries?
What are your boundaries?
And what are your love languages?
Massive. So we'll leave those with you. I could go on for hours about this. I stopped, Rilla.
That is your jam.
That, yes, 100%. But as we finish, we get closer, there's a few more questions that I want to ask
Yes.
as we are running out of time. But my question for you, now that we touch on the relationship with your partner, and I think this is a huge one that I speak to every single day with my clients, is communication. So what is it to you, and sharing your perspective and view on it for others, what does healthy communication look like?
So we hold communication to a very high standard in our home, even with our daughter. So nothing goes unsaid, ever. And we hold space for each other. So what I mean by that is talk. Talk. Don't ever sweep it under the rug. Don't ever suppress it. Don't ever just think it. Say it, even if it makes the other person uncomfortable. Because there's a difference between being a nasty person and then voicing if someone has overstepped your boundaries. And we have that very clear communication in our home. Between the three of us, we know each other's boundaries. So we absolutely talk about everything all the time.
Wow, I think as well, when you said even if it makes the other person feel uncomfortable, I think as well, even if it makes you uncomfortable, but you know that it's something that you need to voice. And we actually had someone on the podcast, last, and he came up with a really good phrase, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it, is whatever the story that you are telling yourself in here, it should always be told, no matter what it is, whether it's going and saying, hey, I've got a story, I've got something on my mind that I really want to communicate with you. And I think it comes back to how you communicate. You know, there's different ways of communicating. You know, if you were to go in and have a conversation with your husband and say, like, that's not going to be heard properly. So not only is it important to voice and express what's going on in here for you, but it's a way you communicate.
Yeah. If you offend somebody, that's none of your business. Because it might not be an offensive statement. Like I said, you might not be a nasty person. If it triggers somebody, it's because it's triggering something within them. And I feel like we welcome disagreements in our home.
Yes. I love
we
that.
Often
we welcome
say
disagreements.
We do. We welcome it. We welcome arguments. We welcome disagreements, but we settle them. We don't sleep on them.
Beautiful.
You could say that we have a great debate team.
I love that.
The three of us could win debates, hands down. But that is what a healthy family is to me. Because there's nothing more uncomfortable being in a situation, especially with a family member, and something has gone unsaid. Do you know what that does in the long term? That ruins families.
Inner turmoil as well.
Get it out. Get it out. Deal with it. Nip it in the bud and move on.
I love how you actually, I'm just going to go off topic here. You sent me a voice note yesterday. I wasn't feeling great. Had some coffee. Coffee doesn't sit well with me. And you said something along the lines is, go and have this drink, do this and do that, like in a really loving way. And then you said, and then we're going to move on. And I love that. And I was like, yes, we're not going to sit here. We're not going to be like, oh, why am I feeling like this? Or I'm just using this as an example. And I really love how you go, we get it out, we communicate it, and then we move on. And we,
I know. It's almost like I went into mum mode, because that's how I speak to my daughter.
Yes.
She walks
I needed
in the door
that though.
and she's had a bad day at school.
Yeah.
You know, so-and-so said that her hair looks crap today.
Oh,
Cool. Let's talk about it. Do you think it looked crap? No. Well, that's fine. You feel how you need to feel. You feel offended by it. That's fine. We've spoken about it. We're not going to talk about it again.
I love that. I do really, really like that approach. So as we finish up with the podcast today, it has been absolutely incredible having you on here, sharing your story and your bits and pieces of everything. But there's always, I'm like, how do I put this into one question? I'm still going to ask both the questions. For women listening right now who are healing, building, or designing a life that they want to live or they so much desire to live, what do you believe is key to creating a healthy relationship? So whether it's with self or with an intimate partner.
Well, I think it always comes down to the individual. I know you're in a team, but at the end of the day, there's there's just you. So it's extremely important that you hold space for yourself and you hold space for each other. Self-care is utmost important. So it is extremely important that you are confident in how you feel. Not just when you look in the mirror, but how you feel. Do you feel good? Do you feel ready to go out and win the day? If you don't, you need to hold space for yourself and you need to ask yourself those hard questions.
Well said.
And same with your partner. If you're noticing something's a bit off with them, you need to encourage them to go and spend some time alone. Go and take care of themselves. Yeah.
Definitely. Beautiful. Thank you, Aimee. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible story, like I said before. I know it's not always easy. I mean, I think you're probably quite used to sharing bits and pieces of your story. But even questions like that can be quite, reflective, and you have to really think about it. So I really value you sharing that with our listeners today, and I'm sure 100% something has landed with someone. I know that, I've heard this story a few times in different ways, and I take something from it every time. So I'm very grateful for that, and thank you. If people are going to want to know how to find you, what is your Instagram handle? Where can they find you?
So it is literally just my name. So Aimee Moresby, which you can just come into my DMs whenever you feel called. I help a lot of women either living with ileostomies or bowel disease or chronic illness. So my DMs are always open, and this is what I do. I love helping and holding space for other people.
Well, thank you again, and until next time.